Call the meeting to order. The President and Board of Trustees. Roll call.
Trustee Fay,
Here.
Trustee Lamb,
Here.
Trustee Peck, Trustee Rassich, Trustee Benucci,
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here, if we could rise for the pledge.
We're seeking a motion to approve the minutes of the Committee of the Whole workshop held on February 9th.
So move.
Second.
One correction, if I may. On page 2, under point number 2, Trustee Fay encouraged the civilianization of the Records Department, not civilization.
The motion was made and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Presidential comments?
I just have one. A little kudos to our finance director. Government Finance Officers Association gave us a certificate of achievement for excellence in financial reporting. So thank you very much. That was presented on, will be presented on April 30th. So congratulations. And that's all I have.
Trustees' comments?
I have a couple, kind of on a different note. First of all, congratulations, Tracy. Well deserved, I'm sure. There seems to be a couple of serious scams that are going on in the community. One of them has been going on for a while. The IRS supposedly is calling you up and tells you to get out there with an ID, with your credit card right away and pay this, or you're going to be fined, all these terrible things. But one that I think is gotten even worse than that is they're preying on older citizens who get some phone call that their grandson is suddenly in trouble or in jail or something, and it's a phony police department or someone calling, and they are scammed out of thousands. And this has happened to at least 2 individuals that I know personally that have fallen for this. And it's horrible because these were older people, didn't have a lot of money, panicked over their grandson. Then they find out their grandson really isn't in California in jail. He's right there, but they find out too late. And I'm talking, one was like 9,000, one was 4,000. This is terrible. So first of all, I want to put that alert out there. But I was wondering, we can put some information on our website, but that's not going to be enough for like some of those older individuals. Is there something we could put in like with the water bill or something like, be careful of these scams, or just something that alerts people that this is, because they make it so real, they just can't help themselves.
Sounds like something we can run through with the Senior Triad program as well, and take a look at some other alternatives too to get the message out.
Yeah, just to kind of touch base with that as well, is it's been going on for years perhaps, and a lot of it's happening overseas. The FBI is well aware of the situation that's going on. I had a personal friend also become a victim of the IRS scam, and the FBI has their own protocol that they follow, and they had indicated that there's a country in particular that they believe it's originating from, and we don't have, shall we say, an agreement between the United States and that particular country at this time for extradition, should you even identify the culprits. But it's, yes, law enforcement's well aware of the scams. I know we have put out several press releases trying to reach out. I believe that Patch may have assisted in us identifying the IRS scam in particular, and we're hoping that that reaches it. But any and all that we can do is
It's just, the best thing to know is your own defense. Anyone asking for money over the phone like that is not legitimate, period. So, thank you.
Maybe we could get a mention in the paper of concerns of the board. I don't know.
Okay, that's all for me.
Are there any?
One thing that's in the paper today, I'd like to comment on, since Trustee Rassick's not here, I'll assume the role that he ordinarily would. There's apparently a Department of Transportation study that said there may be up to 10 derailments per year with trains hauling fuel through possibly major urban areas, similar to the one in Quebec where they had 47 people die and so on. But apparently was in Herald this morning, so you might look it up, but there's a problem. And they talked about ethanol and crude oil. My recollection is, I don't know whether you're familiar with it or not, but the hazardous material, ethanol, is devastating. If you're transporting that and end up with a fire with that, it's a very explosive type material. So I think we need to maybe talk to Canadian National what they're bringing through our town. Make sure that they take whatever precautions they can. Part of the study recommended that there be look at the microphone to work.
Phone calls.
But they're talking also about toughening up the standards for the cars and so on, making them, and so I think we got to make an effort publicly to try to support better regulations, make them safer. Railroad industry says we're interested in doing it, but they like obviously a lot longer timeline than we probably would be happy with. So maybe we can work with them and try to make it safe, at least for Plainfield, which is our immediate interest.
One of the things we could possibly discuss and look into is, I know the chief has approached me talking about a full-scale exercise. We conversed about possibly doing a active shooter involving a school, because it hasn't been many years that we actually did a full-scale exercise to identify our strong points and then our weak points. But we can also look into this as a possible full-scale exercise, bringing in CN to work with us to see what their limitations are, to see if there's any kind of improvements that they can potentially help us with. And if not a full-scale exercise, at the bare minimum, maybe a tabletop exercise.
Yeah, at least go through the exercise of, are we prepared to handle it? I think if you have a major fire like that, you need foam and so on. I'm not sure we're prepared to do that.
Yes,
But anyway, it's well worth exercising that.
I know we had this exact discussion with John Stratton from the FD about if there was a derailment involving hazardous materials, on whether or not the fire department could handle it, and bringing in mutual aid would definitely help. So again, bringing in the FD to PD and CN would be a good thing.
Great, thank you.
I have a couple of comments. I'd like to thank the operations department at the ABC Channel 7. It appears as if the village of Plainfield is going to be getting a camera in our downtown that will offer live feeds through Channel 7. The second comment is also television related. And I see in our budget that we're going to discuss tonight that the Comcast franchise offers some pretty serious revenues for us that I'd like to see. And I know that we are planning on updating some of the equipment. I'd like to have a discussion at a workshop on potential uses for that channel, because I think it's a greatly underutilized resource in our community for announcements and education and different community activities. Thank you.
Are there any other trustee comments?
Run out of trustees.
This would be the time for public comments, not to exceed 3 to 5 minutes per topic. There are no public comments, and we'll proceed with the workshop meeting. First item on the agenda is fiscal year 2015-2016 budget presentation.
Thank you very much. Before I turn this over to Mrs. Pleckham to take you through the compiled budget document, I do want to thank everybody for the exercises that we've gone through the past few months. As you know, we did our initial conversations on the budget starting this past fall, which then allowed for us to state where we were with our property tax revenues. As you recall, back in December, we set our rate to match last year's rate, which resulted in a about $300,000 reduction in revenues, and I might be stealing part of Mrs. Pleckham's report by that part, but still nevertheless wanted to remind you of that conversation. And then this past winter, we went through conversations with where each department was and where staffing challenges and needs might very well be coming through. This past week, we heard from the state of Illinois through Governor Rauner's State of the State address that he intends on pursuing some rather substantive cuts in order to balance the state's budget and address some of their financial concerns. Part of what he has proposed is to take $2 million from the Village of Plainfield and the state of Illinois taxes. That's a 50% reduction in that line item, but which results in about a 10% overall drop in our total revenues. Mr. Fay and I, we were at a meeting this afternoon with our senator and a representative from our representative's office who indicated that they do expect there to be some more conversations and jockeying on that number, and that we very well likely won't end up in that type of position that was initially stated. We still feel pretty confident with where we're estimating that reduction to be with the numbers that are presented here before you tonight. And with that, we feel pretty comfortable with the budget that's before you. The state won't set their budget until after our budget is actually due to be voted upon, so we won't know exactly where we fall on that. However, we still feel very confident with the projections that we've made, and if we do need to make an adjustment after the fiscal year has begun for us and the state's made their announcement, we can have that conversation this summer. With that, Mrs. Plackham?
Thank you. You said most of what I was going to say, but I'll add some more to it. As the board is aware, we've been working through the draft budget since back in October of last year. The proposed budget in full is in your packet tonight. The only piece of information that we haven't discussed up until this point was the general fund revenues. So Brian's touched on some of the salient points for the corporate fund. We'll go through a little bit more tonight and answer any questions across any of the divisions that you might have. In addition to that, the total budget is approximately 48 million, just under 48 million, and then that's all funds. It is a balanced budget. 22.5 million is included within general fund operations. 15.7 million is water and sewer fund, and 5.5 million is directly related to capital infrastructure related improvements. When we discussed at the past workshops in regards to staffing, we have included within the proposed budget that's in your packet 3 positions that are currently part-time and brought them to full-time within the budget that you see. That's within the GIS position, code enforcement, and building inspector positions. Also, based on past discussion, we've included funding for contractual services for the Route 59 corridor maintenance along the medians, which is about 7 miles long. I believe the estimate was right around $40,000 we're hopeful to have for over the summer. And staff's position with the contractual services is if we get into a position where we need to look at our revenues and our expenditures, that is one contract and not employee-based position that we can look at and reduce if necessary. There are positions, as the board is aware, that we need to address if the revenues change. We do not have our property tax valuations as of yet, so the estimates within the budget are directly related to the tax levy discussions that we had back in November and December. If those, and as well as any of the state information comes along, we'll address that and bring that back to the board for further discussion and review, more than likely in the summertime by the time we hear anything, if not later than that, depending on timing. Other than that, within the corporate fund, what I've included in your packet is on the first page is the summary page of the revenues, and the revenues are about just under 2.5% higher than what was adopted, primarily relating to increases in regards to the refuse collection. Also, sales and use tax is actually up slightly. It does include the reduction, as Brian mentioned, in the income tax revenue. But overall, it's pretty much a flat proposed revenue budget as it relates to the corporate fund. Expenditures, each expenditures division has been presented to the board. You'll see the summaries on the first page, which brings us to a balanced budget in the general fund. I'd like to spend some time on the revenues, and I'd like to start with any questions that the board might have. The revenue detail is on pages 2 through pages 4 of the first packet, and we can speak to those as you wish, but I thought you might have some questions that you might want to ask up in concert to the general fund itself.
On page number 2,
Mhm.
home rule sales tax, why were we flatlined in 2013 and 2014?
The way that the budget document is presented, home rule sales tax is included as a portion of our water and sewer fund that's dedicated to water and sewer at this point, and then the rest of the home rule sales tax is to help offset our capital infrastructure costs in our capital fund. Given the issues that we've had in the past years with our revenue challenges, we've funded and we have budgeted a transfer. It used to be $1 million towards help in the streets division of our corporate fund. In fiscal 13 and 14, it was budgeted at $500,000, and those transfers weren't necessary to happen. So no home rule sales tax was necessary to be funded within our corporate fund. It was placed back into the capital fund to fund infrastructure improvements. Staff is recommending to keep that proposed amount in the 16 budget based on the revenue concerns that we have. We feel that we're probably going to need those funds for fiscal 16 to help offset some of the streets maintenance costs.
Thank you.
On the revenue, 20% reduction comes off of what number? It looks like it comes off of actual for 2014, but you got an estimated 2015, which is, you know, it's a little bit lower, but it's not 20% from the 2015 number, so for the 2014?
Correct. And the information that we were provided through IML and various sources, they were using the 2014 actual numbers because that's what they had for their data. That is absolutely correct.
Explains that.
Tracy, page 3, there's a line item that says rent, and there's one further down that says rental income.
Yes.
Can
Yes.
you explain those, please?
The top, let me see. We've combined what was the rental income for Westcom as well as the income for the dive shop property into one line item for this fiscal year. As you know, Westcom's no longer renting. We're hopeful to see some of that space be rented out some point in time next fiscal year, but it didn't make sense to have them separate. We can account for that separately in the office here.
Thank you.
To that point, as Mrs. Plecka mentioned, you likely will see an agreement in the near future. We do have a law enforcement group that will be coming in there. It's a training group called Tri-Rivers Training. They rent office space currently down in Crest Hill. It's a little cramped for their needs, and we've got space that is more than capable for servicing them, and they'll be paying about the same as what Westcom was paying in rent. They don't have nearly the utility demands, so it will look like a lot less of a rent than what we're getting currently, but the net is about the same. And they've been a good partner with us, and we're happy to have them as a tenant.
Page 4, the revenues and the interfund transfers. Staff has continued to include a transfer relating to MFT to corporate and from the TIF fund to corporate, and that's MFT usually encompasses costs such as salt or electricity for our street lighting purposes, and then the TIF fund is related to work and efforts done through administration sources that aren't included in the expenses of the TIF. So those are continuing, although in the past, in the fiscal actual of 14, nothing was transferred. There were budgeted amounts at that point. That's revisited on an annual basis to see the necessity at the end of the year, and also depending on snow events that happen throughout the year, if it's needed to take any transfers from MFT related to salt specifically. We sense that that's probably going to be the case. And everything after the revenues are all the summaries of the funds as well as the detail for each individual fund, which is in corporate. These have been discussed at previous workshops. I'd be happy to answer any questions on those. And this is what is intended to be displayed as it relates to the public hearing, which is scheduled to be March 16th.
Just to kind of reiterate what Brian said earlier, you've incorporated the 3 part-time jobs going to full-time in that, which I think is very appropriate. The other thing I'd like to comment on is that been looking at these documents now for several years, and I think our database is phenomenal, which allows you to budget very well. Some people wonder why we can do such a good job of budgeting year after year. Well, the reason is you got a tremendous database. You can look at previous years, you track it very nicely. Remember the first year you started, we had maybe a guess at what the previous year is. Now you've got hard data for 5 years, and it's phenomenally effective in terms of allowing us to budget, control costs, and everything else. And it's impressive. So the investment we put into the new system several years ago is well worth it, from my opinion. So.
If there's no other questions on corporate fund, the next section is water and sewer and fund. And what I'd like to bring up is, this was discussed back in November of last year. There were scenarios that were brought before the board at that point as far as revenue expense summaries, and the rate structure has been incorporated within this draft budget. So what you see is the final draft for water and sewer relating to revenues in regard, what's included within water and sewer not only is the charges for services, which is your water and sewer fees, it also does have a portion of what Trustee Fay was talking about, is the state Illinois taxes, which is part of the home rule sales tax. 1.6 million is budgeted for next fiscal year, which is a portion of our home rule sales tax that's to offset some of the costs on the water and sewer side as it relates to operations.
Also point out that while we have a balanced budget from a cash flow perspective with regard to the water and sewer fund, it still doesn't cover our full depreciation costs. Depreciation is a rather substantive dollar amount for us. It's about $3 million. However, that's a conscious decision that we've made that from a cash perspective, we're running at about zero. We don't, if we happen to perform a little bit better, as Alan points out, when it's a very warm summer and people buy a lot of water, there is a little bit more money that comes in that helps to offset that depreciation. It's also why we also kept the sewer rate the same for the proposed rate increases. All that was adjusted were the water side, so that when we do have those increased summer sales, that it isn't being spent on the sewer side, being that a lot of that goes into watering grass. So again, we don't fully cover our costs. It is something that we subsidize indirectly. And then directly, as Mrs. Pleckham mentioned, through the sales tax.
Glad you brought up the depreciation point. Every previous year we've put it in, not for budgeting purposes, but for accounting purposes at the end. I assume we'll do the same. The only other question I've got is, why does it all go against water? Isn't most of the depreciation on the sewer side?
Well, what you have, the sheet that you're looking at is the combined sheet where we do
Yeah, I know,
water
I looked
and
at the
sewer.
individual sheets.
Oh, on the individual seats, yeah. Actually,
Sorry
they
about that.
no, the auditors do a very good job of breaking out which is which, and I would hazard to guess that it has to be based on the life of the structure. The sewer system would be a very expensive. The wastewater treatment plant is a terribly expensive thing to take care of. However, the depreciable life on that is also rather long, so that helps out. The cost of the lift stations and the pumping stations and the like that Alan has for water, they tend to wear out a little bit quicker, so you have a shorter depreciation life on those.
As long as the audit breaks it out, I think it's appropriate to know what it is, because you're going to end up having to replace it eventually, and it's nice to know how much you put aside for that. So, okay.
Or didn't put aside for it.
Yeah, the audit does
True.
has this specific breakup. You know, we can actually look back at it and reconfigure our budget to have it accurately reflect which is water and which is sewer, though. But that information is available. As far as depreciation, it shouldn't change too much in the next couple of years. It's directly related to capital expenditures. We do know we have some expenditures related to the Route 30 infrastructure improvements, so we may see a slight uptick in regards to that, but the dollar amount isn't as great as what it's been in the past when we're redoing water treatment plants and sewer plants and things of that nature. So it should be relatively consistent in the, within the next few years still. The water and sewer fund also does not have any new staffing represented within the budget, and that was nothing that was included within this budget as well. So The next section would be your capital improvement fund. We have just had the last workshop, we talked for the second time on the capital fund. So this is the third time the board has seen this information as it relates to projects and the capital fund specifically. If there's any questions, I'm sure Alan would be happy to answer them in regards to projects, but I think we've done a couple presentations on which projects are being handled. And but on the revenue side, straightforward as it's been, you'll see a decline specifically to an interfund transfer. If, as the board recalls, we were faced with a little bit of a deficit balance in the capital fund. Back in fiscal 14, we were able to remove the deficit balance by initiating a transfer to clear that $4.3 million fund balance deficit, which originally was $12 million. So we're running in a positive balance in the capital fund, which is a good thing. But generally speaking, the revenues run right around $6 to $7 million in this fund.
I have a question. In the capital fund expenses, it lists building improvements for 175. Can someone explain that, please?
Sure. The current fiscal year, the 175 was included related to the build out to this building, a portion of that. In addition to that, there's some discussion on salt related, dome related expenses that we wanted to put in there in case the need for salt storage came up as well. In addition to the fact that the buildings are getting a little older, we wanted to have some funding available in case there were some updates that needed to happen in any of the buildings within the village.
Case in point, earlier today, we had some issues with the HVAC system over at the southern half of the police department. So we will have an emergency purchase that you will likely see at the next village board meeting. You know, Alan had it very well put some time ago. I think he said things get old. And he looked at me, and I was really feeling uncomfortable as he said that. But I think he was talking about the buildings. But no, I'm just kidding. But we do expect to have some expenses there. I think where you might have been going with that, Paul, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. But was the conversation with regard to the camera system here in the in this room and the like. That's not we don't have that covered in the capital. That's actually in the operations budget. And we actually have that in two different areas. It's 50,000 in one section and another 50,000 in the other section. The estimates, we first went in thinking it would be about $50,000, but as we were getting the budget documents together, it's more in the $80,000 to $100,000 range. So we have that broken out into two different areas for that. So we do expect to see some improvements to the system here in this room. We still also then need to make some improvements, leaving from this building, connecting then to the Comcast connection. Apparently, the link from our building to their fiber optic system needs some upgrades too.
And then my last question to Alan, under grants, and I know you've done a phenomenal job over the years with securing grants of a variety of types. I see 0 is projected for this fiscal year. Do we have anything in the pipeline or ideas on different grant opportunities?
Yeah, there are a few other sections within the budget where there are other grants specifically for different areas within the budget. Within capital, we anticipate that $500,000 grant for the 143rd Street extension, which has been talked about at length in the past. 127th Street is a project that we'll be working on the engineering. If that comes to fruition sooner, we can always make adjustments. We can definitely make adjustments in the budget to receive grant money. We've done that before too as well. That would become available as soon as that project matures. Renwick Road is another area that has already been pre-approved for grant money, and we're currently seeking ITEP money and other things of that nature. Keep in mind that part of the Route 30 improvements, we do have our proportionate share, but things such as pathways and those multi-use paths which are within the village's strategic plan, the state, and I probably should correct myself because actually that's federal money that's coming. For that, they're picking up 80% of the tab. And although that grant doesn't show up within the budget document, it's something that people here in the village will realize is an improvement that we can all use. So we have a few of those that don't necessarily land on this budget page, but they are passed through the federal government as part of the state projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Persons and his staff also have a few other grant applications that they are currently working on. The mayor and I have scheduled meetings with staff with our elected officials in Washington, D.C., so we're looking forward to trying to push those along too. So,
Again, the point was made earlier, this is a conservative budget as we have been in the past, and we do budget conservatively on the revenue side, so we didn't want to bring the expectation level up that $500,000, $2 million grant would come through this year. We'd rather surprise you with the good news. How's that?
Or not give a heart attack to the management services director, right? And then the last section within the documents you have are all what we consider the miscellaneous funds. They're important funds nonetheless. We just call it that. These have not changed since we've presented them in the past. They consist of our MFT and our debt service fund, tort immunity, which is our insurance, property and casualty, workers' comp, audit fund, police pension, DARE, TIF, and alcohol enforcement. And you can see between bond and interest, tort, and audit, that's where a portion of the property taxes go that the village receives. And then MFT, the state, is the MFT revenues that we receive from the state. We're still conservatively budgeting for MFT revenues. We have not heard anything definite either way that I'm aware of as far as MFT revenues coming to the village. And again, if things should change, we will bring these documents back and have discussions at that point.
the other thing is you'll notice that there are 4 funds in particular that show negative positions on them. Those are all by design. The Tort Immunity Fund, we're using our fund balance to pay down so that we actually have the fund balance at an acceptable level within the policy that we had approved. And then as well with the TIF fund, as you know, we have a big capital investment being made to that to our downtown this year. So that's why it's showing a negative position. We've been saving up so that we can make the refresh, and that's by design.
Each page within the document will reflect what the fund balance projections are in each fund, and the funds that come into these miscellaneous funds are usually restrictive for this purpose. So they remain in those funds and they need to be spent for those purposes. So that's why you'll see fluctuations on the deficiencies sometimes from budget year to budget year.
So there were 3 proposed full-time positions that have now been taken off the table. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Are there any other questions for Mrs. Pleckham or the directors? If not, then, as Tracy mentioned, we will schedule the public hearing for the 16th. And then hopefully as well have a vote that same night, unless there are any substantive changes or questions that come up at the public hearing. We'll hopefully have a vote on the 16th as well.
Yeah, that I think you brought up before. We can, if things are not as bleak from the revenue point of view, we can come back and alter the budget later on. Right now, conservative is got to be the name of the game.
Correct.
Same thing with the grants. You just don't want to promise something you can't deliver. So, but we can still go back after the other positions that we have serious interest in. So, but not yet.
I fully anticipate after the sometime this summer, as we get a better sense of where we stand. Either way, it could be that we have to have a conversation as to what steps we need to do to reduce our budget if it plays out the way that it does. That being said, Mrs. Pleckham and I have talked through a few ideas with Mr. Persons, because it mostly will impact his operations. from on the capital side, and we'll take a look at where those options are. And if we find out that we're a little too conservative and that funds are not going to be cut to the extent that they are being proposed, or even as we estimate, we can have other conversations. That being said, I do have to point out that where Governor Rauner is with his budget process and his budget presentation is not too dissimilar to the playbook that was used in Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So we can fully anticipate that that reduction in LGDF, while it was mentioned today, won't necessarily happen today, but it's very likely that that's where we will end up at some point in the future. So it's usually a foreboding message. At least that's the way it's played out in those other 3 states, and I'm expecting that we'll see something similar here. So, sorry to be the bearer of bad news yet again. Okay.
Yeah, hit a microphone and just identify yourself.
My name is Ed O'Rourke. I just wanted to listen first, and then I had a couple of things that came up. So I just wanted to say, for people that haven't had the opportunity to speak with staff and go over the budget, it's amazing what you guys have done over the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you very much for all your hard work, and kudos to all of you, because for people that haven't understood, and once I got a little bit more into it and understanding, you kind of realize where the village was 4 or 5 years ago to where we are today. So thank you for that. One of the couple questions that I had, or comments or concerns, I guess, with the current budget as it's moving forward, probably a sore subject this year, but that's the snow removal, salt purchase. I see that it's actually gone down from what's proposed in 15, or estimated in 15, to 16, and I would just ask that maybe you guys take a second look at that, because I know as a budget, typically that's kind of a goal. So if the departments are probably very good at working towards the goal in the budget, I would hate to see, you know, a reduction in potentially quality of services just because that number was lowered for whatever reason it was lowered for. And then the other question I had is, I know years ago, and I don't know if the village still does it, I didn't see it in the thing, and that's the mosquito abatement for West. I know the West Nile is still an issue out there, so I didn't know if the village is still doing that or not. So.
We actually haven't a mosquito abatement program for 7 or 8 years. The township was providing mosquito abatement services to all of the township properties. However, they've scaled back and they only provide abatement services to the township only.
Not the village, but the township.
Just the township only.
Cut us out, yeah.
Right. That was an issue actually that was raised. Well, I want to say it was about 5 years ago by Trustee Lamb as well. That's a good point that you bring up, Mr. O'Rourke. Yeah, the township supervisor at the time pointed out that they hadn't been servicing the village for quite some time, and yeah, it's been a program that we haven't.
So years ago it was actually the township and not the village? Then?
Correct.
Has the village considered doing it?
Not at this point.
Thank you.
I'll just answer briefly. We expect salt to return to more normal prices. It's been tough out east, but overall throughout the country there hasn't been much salt usage in the big picture. So we anticipate a lower cost per ton, and that's what's anticipated in the budget. If it comes in higher, we can always make an adjustment, but I want to assure the board, the mayor, and the public that we will purchase sufficient salt to cover the community.
Just for a point, we started our negotiations with the salt providers in March last year, and then we didn't find out about our purchase till like July, and then we had to make other arrangements. But we did start our negotiations in March, so well ahead of the season, if you will. So, and we're going to proceed that same manner this year, right?
We have already started those discussions, and then also looking closely at the state program too as well. I know that we were not selected as part of the state program, but I can tell you that a majority of the communities, even the bigger communities, are still opting to go towards the state program again. The changes have been made, and not only that, there's a level playing field now where everyone's returned back to the same state as far as their renewable contracts and things like that we didn't have the option to exercise. So it should level the playing field. The cost should be reduced, but I'll be happy. I'll keep the board apprised to that, and we'll stay well ahead of the curve on this one.
Alan, if I could make a recommendation that similarly, modifications or changes to snow removal contracting, you know, I won't be here, but I would hope that that process and that discussion begins long before the first snowfall next fall.
Strengthen the language in the contracts. We're going to encourage additional contractors to bid on the program too as well. And I know we brought up the township and talked about mosquito abatement, but we're currently working on a mutual aid agreement with both highway commissioners in Wheatland and in Plainfield Township, and they are both amenable to actually have a mutual aid. We have a mutual aid agreement with all the bigger communities for large storms, large scale items, but not really with the township for daily type operations. So this will be before the board within the next month or so, but we anticipate actually mutual aid with the townships to assist the village when necessary, and the village to assist the township when necessary, and it really makes good sense. From street light repair to street sweeping, the townships do not have street sweepers. We have 2 street sweepers. To even snow removals. In this heavy event, the township has more equipment per mile, and that in some instances they did and could assist the village in the future, and we could provide in-kind services to them as well. And at the end of the day, the taxpayer doesn't pay any more for services. So we see it as a win-win situation, and we've talked about this as a management team and feel like it could provide a vast improvement for the village at no cost to the taxpayers.
Couple of reminders, March 2nd is our next village board meeting. March 3rd is the planning commission. The 7th would be our next ongoing strategic planning. And March 9th will be our next committee of the whole.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries.
We'll work it out next time.